Okay, now we are online.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our TLTS research channel. For those who don't know what TLTS is, you can guess. TL is translanguaging, TS is trans-semiotizing. Before everything else, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Today, we are very, very honored and privileged to have Professor Christiane Dalton-Puffer with us. Christiane is a professor of English linguistics in the University of Vienna in Austria. And Christiane, the time there is early morning.
It is indeed.
Yeah, so right now we have three continents, I think, Europe, Canada, and also Asia, Hong Kong. So we are in three different time zones, and I'm sure our audience is all over the world. So today, Christiane, Professor Dalton-Puffer, and Professor Dalton-Puffer once taught me how to pronounce her name is Puffer, because Anglo speakers Puffer, but the authentic way is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's because
so
it's German.
Yeah, it's German, right? Yeah. So today the topic is cognitive discourse functions, and it is a useful concept to integrate language and content, especially in CLIL. And of course, we all know that Christiane is a guru in CLIL research. So without further ado, over to you, Christiane.
Thank you very much, Angel, and thank you to the members of your research group for inviting me to talk today, about this concept of cognitive discourse functions. As Angel already mentioned, I come from CLIL research, but before I continue talking, I guess I ought to share my screen in actual fact. Okay. So this is going to be, wait a minute, I need to, right. You can see only my slide now, is that correct? No?
Okay, we see your slides and also your next slide.
Okay. Well, I will not do that then. Okay. Okay, I will use this. I will use this display and just do it like that. Okay. I won't be able to use the animations in that case, but here we go. So. All right. Okay. I would. My talk will be structured into 4 parts. I'm aiming to talk for about 30 minutes, and I will be very happy, of course, to get into a discussion with you, and thank you for sending me those questions in advance. As Angel already mentioned, I come from CLIL research, and this is the context in which I felt the need to develop those ideas that I'm going to talk about today. Because CLIL implementations in Europe mostly are of the so-called hard CLIL kind, that is, content teachers teaching their subject with their content learning goals, curricular goals, assessment criteria, and pedagogical practices. And it was this need to bridge the gap between the language learning world and the subject education world that brought me to think about cognitive discourse functions. Now, in terms of theoretical anchoring, there is, of course, the vast field of curriculum theory in education, with the sort of umbrella topic of educational goals. And in applied linguistics, we have an equally large body of literature and knowledge concerning academic language. The citations that I've put there are emblematic because there's, of course, a lot more than what is on these two slides. The the bridge idea between the two fields is that when learners and teachers work towards those curriculum goals, they language the ideas, the concepts that are captured in the curriculum goals, so that these discourse functions then realize cognitive operations. My German colleague Johannes Vollmer formulated it as you can see on in the first citation there. And in both citations, the basic idea is this linkage between subject learning goals and the linguistic representations, the verbalizations that they receive. In my case, my main research interest is classroom interaction, but we're also talking about learning materials, about test items, and examination answers. Now, what I did is I went through as many curricula that as I could understand. Here you've got some translations from German and Austrian curricula, which would be originally in German, and you can see those learning goals formulated using performative verbs that you find in bold. I've also put together a couple of learning goals from Hong Kong curricula that show the same type of performative verbs in their formulations of the learning goals. And so what I ended up with was a very long list of such performative verbs, and I felt the need to organize them in some way to make them communicable to people who are not professionally involved with studying academic language and learning and education. So the idea is of the CDF construct is to put some order into performative verbs that are used in subject learning goals. And as you can see, we're talking about about learning goals that are in use across many school subjects. So the principles then is this link between cognitive operations and verbalization. And here I already point to one of the questions that was asked. Of course, not all cognitive processes will be necessarily verbalized. There are other ways of semioticizing, but this, the CDF construct, at least for the time being, and as far as I'm concerned, being a linguist very much is about verbalization. So it covers only one aspect of semiosis in an educational context, but I would argue a very central one. So we cannot see thoughts, so verbalization is this as an observable analog of a thought process. And in terms of linguistic theorization, I linked up the CDFs to Speech Act, so they would reflect communicative intentions of the participants in the learning event. Individually, but also in their joint construction as they go about the task of teaching and learning. I'm not making any claims about psychological reality of the CDF construct. The goal of this is simply to serve as a heuristic, to be operationalizable also in interdisciplinary communication between educationalists, educational linguists, and subject specialists, subject education specialists. So we've got those communicative intentions. Surveying all those performative verbs, I found these 7 key communicative intentions, or I thought I found them. I'm waiting for somebody to suggest a reshuffle, but maybe it will happen. I tell you how we can cause up the world. I'll tell you how about the extension of this object and specialist knowledge, and so on. Then examples of such performative verbs can be matched to those communicative intentions. And you can see already that some of these baskets, some of these categories are more populous than others. And then I had to label those categories somehow. It's a bit tricky because you're using one of the exemplars to label the category, so they have this tendency to get a bit dominant in our thinking about those categories. But really, we have to consider all these examples when we're looking to apply the CDF construct. But it seemed to me that if just numbering them, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that would be in mnemonic terms, that would not be very, very clever. So the next step was then to ask empirical questions. The main ones would be, do these CDFs actually correlate with subject learning goals of specific subjects in specific educational systems? Because of course there are differences in educational cultures, and I'm not going to talk about this now because the second reading that I sent you is an example of a study that did look at that. Then how much evidence is there in classroom discourse possible, but also that's what we're going to look at, but equally important in materials, in exam questions, in assessment, and so on. How are they realized discursively? By whom are they realized? Is there explicit attention to these verbalizations? So, okay. So this is now a publication where we put together the results of 5 MA projects, as you can see, covering a range of different school subjects, but also looking at English as a foreign language, because I was interested in how similar or different that was. Here you've got the grade level, and you can see a dominance of upper secondary data in this. If I'm running too fast for anybody, you stop me also if you want to ask need a clarification. And then, so a very broad look at this shows you how many of these functions were actually used per lesson. And you can see that in those studies where both teacher and learner language was analyzed, we've got they're quite close together on average. EFL, there seems to be a lower incidence of cognitive discourse functions. I would say clearly because there's also less academic topics being covered in EFL. So just to take one focus on one subject, looking at the biology, looking at the biology lessons, we find that describe and define are the most frequently used functions, with explore and explain as runner-up. So these were 2 didactic units taught by 2 different teachers. And you can see that the range of discourse functions used was from 50 to 100 in a lesson. Doing this kind of thing across the various subjects, you see, this is a ranking of the most frequent at the top to the least frequent at the bottom discourse functions used in these individual data sets. And you can see that describe is high in quite a number of them, whereas explore and evaluate tend to be, but also categorize tend to be lower to the bottom. So across all these all these 5 studies, we have got these 3 top CDFs. The describing is really a very central function in classroom interaction, especially in whole classroom interaction. So this is for this establishment of intersubjectivity, I would claim. Quickly, who performs the discourse functions? There is a variation between different teachers also, but what you can see very clearly is that EFL is vastly more student-centered than any of the other subjects. But there are differences between teachers. Economics teachers worked more student-centered way, but the physics and biology teachers also did a lot of interactive development of ideas. Explicit, the final research question, explicit attention to CDFs. The bottom line is simply there is hardly any at all. Only in the physics lessons, quite a bit of attention was paid to explaining how to explain something, giving reasons and causes, and also in biology. And in biology also to definitions. The kind of things that have been counted there is all a kind of very low-key attention, simply using such performative verbs explicitly. And there's episodes like the one at the bottom, yeah, so how one does or does not do definitions are extremely rare. Yeah, like if you'd like to read this. So developed countries, what are developed countries? They're countries where the environment where they are entwickelt. Professor, how do you say developed? Yeah, developed. They're high developed. And then the teacher, well, you can't really explain the word by using the word. Yeah, this will lead you into trouble. But it's not followed up in actual fact by a scaffolded definition as an exemplar of what a proper definition would look like. So this was this group of MA studies and further applications of the CDF construct. I just wanted to briefly mention 4 studies, all of which have been done in Spain. So Breeze and Dafoe in 2017 compared examination answers in a tertiary business administration course. Different groups writing in their L1 Spanish or in their L2 English medium of instruction, and they compared exam answers that were graded high or low by the business administration instructors. And the difference between the highly and low graded answers was clearly that the high graded ones gave explicit responses to the required combinations of discourse function as they were required by the formulation of the questions. Nashat Sobi worked with first-year education students, also English medium of instruction in Spain, and her interest was how to support them in developing their academic literacy in EMI regarding the function of define. And she designed, trialed, and evaluated in-class activities that supported the learners in recognizing analyzing, but also formulating written definitions, and she could indeed achieve a significant improvement in the elaborateness and precision of the definitions of those education students, and which gained them higher grades on the part of the education lecturers. The next two studies are based on school level data. They both come from the same project led by Ana Llinades in Madrid. Tom Morton compared also definitions, but this time of grade 6 and actually also grade 8 students. Grade 6 is primary education in Spain and many other countries, not in Austria. The subjects were both science and history, and data were collected in Spanish L1 and English L2. And something that was not necessarily to be expected, but what came out is that actually the learners' definitions were very similar in both languages, reflecting presumably their state of cognitive development. And in collaboration with Natalia Evnitskaya, together with her, we looked at the function of categorize in parts of the same data set. We looked at a kind of role play task, so an radio interview situation that was done for the data collection. Same students, grade 6 and grade 8 students, science and history, data in Spanish L1 and L2. What emerged from our analysis, apart from a elaboration of the category Categorize, was that there were clear preferences among the subjects for specific discourse functions. So comparing a subcategory of Categorize seems to be really a definitory figure of thought for history, at least at this age level. Whereas classification, of real classification, played a much more prominent part in science. So we've got one table here, all but one actual classifications in the whole data set came from science, whereas 220 of the almost 300 comparisons were done in history. Conceptually, structurally, these realizations of Categorize are very similar in L1 and L2. So in this, our study, our results parallel those of Tom Morton. What we did find, we also did a systemic functional analysis in terms of the lexicon that was used. There was definitely more abstraction possible in the L1. So the lexicon of abstract words was really hugely bigger in the L1 than in the L2. This is now the, I said, the elaboration of the function Categorize that we developed through this analysis. I'm not going to explain this in any detail here, but actually this is what I'm hoping that we are going to achieve over time, mapping out all the 7 categories in this kind of detail through data analysis and this dialogue between empirical and conceptual work. Now, finally, a few thoughts on methodology. Now, what we're doing here with the analysis of classroom interaction, but also other types of task fulfillment orally or in writing is a functional semantic analysis in terms of the communicative intentions. So this is interpretive. That's clear. One problem which emerged early on with the theoretical contextualization that I chose as speech acts, so the classic speech acts or in pragmatics are conceived as of monologically, of speaker intentions, whereas in classroom interaction, of course, a very typical way of how the discourse involves is that things are co-constructed between the teacher and the learners, but also between peers, between the learners themselves. I haven't quite found a solution for that other than saying, well, we just extend this monologic conceptions of speech acts into a dialogic dimension. So just one example from a history, upper secondary history lesson, this early US American history. So who were the pilgrims? And this the learner say the early settlers. Yeah, okay, wow, aren't you clever? So anything else that you could add which makes sense as far as the settlers are concerned, and then the learner Halil adds that were persecuted because of their religion. So he completes the definition. We get the categorization and then a description of the two basic elements of a definition. What is typical of spontaneous classroom interaction is that this is not followed up by a reformulation. Well, it's echoed by the teacher, but she does not formulate the complete definition or ask a learner to do that. And my claim would be that if teachers did that once in a while, obviously you don't have to do it every time. Doing that would raise learners' awareness. It would model the function for the learners, so that those who don't pick up these things osmotically have a chance to see what is required of them. One of your questions was addresses this the social equity question, and that is, I think, sort of an answer to that. I think the giving learners the chance to become aware, making them aware of what is required of them, is very crucial there. So we're talking qualitative analysis. So in doing this, we're using qualitative data analysis software, coding, and what has also become obvious in analyzing the classroom data, but not only, also in analyzing exam answers or other kinds of tasks that were used for data collection, is that there are at least two levels of realization of those discourse functions. Yesterday, I invented the Matryoshka principle, so these Russian dolls, that are stacked inside each other. And there are these tiny realizations, individual discourse functions, very often realized by single turns, but also co-constructed, as we have also seen with this definition, which are often, but not always, part of longer stretches of talk, episodes that as a whole pursue a certain communicative goal, like constructing an explanation of something or reporting on something, and inside, like moves, if you want, individual basic level CDFs are nested in there. This is one example. Unfortunately, I can't use the animation here. That was a written answer to a prompt, and you can see it's a very nice classification. Society, Roman society is divided in 3 groups: the patricians, blah 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 blah, the plebeians, da, 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 and the last groups are slaves. But in between, oops, the learner has inserted an evaluation, an evaluative comment inside the classification. In classroom interaction, this extract would demonstrate something similar. We are in physics, grade 9. They're talking about different energy types. And so this is the classic situation. We revise at the beginning of the lesson. What did we do last time? We had a quick look at this idea of changing energy types from one to another. So this would be the introduction of reporting what we did last time. So this E stands for episode. And here the teacher does a categorization, 2 types of energy, kinetic and potential energy. Then he goes to ask for an explanation. The student S9 attempts an explanation, and the teacher then describes what is behind this explanation. So we have a description here. You stretch the rubber band, you then let it go and shoots your favorite, well, whoever across the classroom. And then moves on to a definition of potential energy. Energy is stored in something, in the arrangement of particles. So we would have these, the gray ones would be the basic level functions embedded into an episode of reporting. Here is an extract from a coding manual where we have the basic level codes, the episode level codes, and the meta level codes, which, as I have mentioned earlier, we need very rarely because there is very little meta level there. Unless you do a project like Sylvia, my PhD student, Sylvia Baumer-Schallinger, is doing, actually designing materials and classroom interventions where such meta communication is also purposefully worked in. Okay, so my conclusions in terms of classroom interaction, CDFs are just parts of the fabric. They don't, if you look at a transcript, you won't be able to categorize each and every turn as a cognitive discourse function. There are also other things going on, of course, in classroom interaction. The content pedagogical goals, the learning goals of science or history or geography, etc., determine, of course, which are going to be the focal CDFs. And I would contend that explicit attention to them would be beneficial in terms of modeling and using the written medium. This is something that is kind of directed at classroom teachers in the Central European context, where student writing in content subjects is actually used very little. Science classrooms or geography classrooms in Central Europe are very oral events. What's desirable and what has started, what is in its beginnings, is cooperation, research cooperation with subject education specialists, because CLIL research has been done practically exclusively by applied linguists up till now. Then going beyond classroom interaction to also analyze and develop teaching materials with attention to the realization of cognitive functions, the verbalization of cognitive functions, looking at test prompts and answers, and possibly that is something that nobody has undertaken yet, I think. See how learner age, of course, impacts on the kind of thing, how we use the CDF idea for in the classroom. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll send you the presentation if you want. I've put together the references that I mentioned in the talk. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Christiane. This is a very clear and very useful presentation. I know that our co-hosts, our seminar co-hosts, have prepared some questions, so I'll go with Pedro first. Pedro, can you?
Yes, can you? Okay, thank you, Dr. Dalton-Puffer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the seminar and the explanations. It was very useful for my research, and as well for the research of the other members in our research group. And I believe that the audience in the Facebook found it useful as well. So I have one question, which was about the. I think it's something that you mentioned in one of your articles, which is about how the empirical research addressed the question of the cognitive discourse functions have faced validity with teachers, and whether they find the construct useful in transposing cognitive discourse functions into pedagogical practice. So I'd like you to comment a little bit more on that. So if you or your research team and your research collaborators, if they have found resistance in relation to using the construct or adapting it to their pedagogical practice, and if this resistance was mostly found in content teachers or language teachers as well.
Interestingly, no, there has been very little resistance, but I mean, it's of course also you cannot generalize, because those teachers who agree to collaborate with researchers, they're already teachers who have got an interest in what those researchers are interested in. So there is a degree of openness there. The real test would be if one were to roll out some interventions based on the CDF idea to a really large group of teachers. But the projects in which my PhD students have collaborated, there definitely has been no resistance, actually a very positive resonance, because of the ease with which they can link up the wordings or the lingo in which the CDFs are getting talked about to what is familiar to them from their pedagogical world, yeah, and their the thinking about geography, education, etc., etc. So there isn't such a huge chasm between the terminological and the world of CDFs and subject education. What has been fascinating and a bit worrying rather is that the resistance comes from the students in the interventions. They complained about why are we looking at language here? This is history. This is history. After the intervention had undergone some adaptations, then they were more accepting of it. Maybe also because one of the teachers in that particular project really went to town about this focus on language. She was not a language teacher at all, but she really sort of took it on, and that was just too much for the students. They didn't like that. They wanted their normal history teaching. So I can see some people nod, and you've probably also had this experience that the learners are actually quite adamant to that the teachers stick to their damn timetable, and if it is now history, it should be history and not English.
It is fascinating to hear that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your answer.
I guess, Christiane, I guess it's because of the design of the assessment task. Traditional history assessment, they may not pay attention to the way they present their arguments. So,
although the grading then implicitly does pay attention to that.
So one strategy is for the teacher to be very transparent with. It's called visible pedagogy, right? So if you want to score a good grade in my history essay, you need to pay attention to the language, not language for anything, but language for writing your history essay, making your argument, right? The functions,
When with CLIL, that is unfortunately flies directly into the face of the CLIL ideology in Austria, in the sense that language is not important. Yeah, so it's okay. This is your second language. This is English. Of course, you're not perfect, so it doesn't matter how you get your ideas across, as long as you get them across. But in reality, of course, it's not as easy as that in terms of how then student work gets evaluated.
Yeah.
But it's there is also no attention paid to the language in first language history teaching, say.
Precisely. So that's why I see so much value in CDF, Cognitive Discourse Functions, in raising awareness, because it's not language, it's about discourse functions, it's about verbalizing your intention, your function, your functions, your intentions. So I see a lot of potential for using CDF in designing assessment, CLIL assessment.
And I mean, the two of the projects that were done in Spain, the Breeze and Dafoe and the Nashad Sobi, were actually, the starting points were actually assessment questions.
Yeah. And also, instead of saying it's language, it's semiotics, like what you say, the semiosis. It's meaning making. It's not language, because you can make meaning using language. You can make meaning using multimodalities, like gestures. So we need to have a very broad, with CLIL teachers or policymakers. We need to raise awareness of semiotic awareness, or semiotic literacy, or semiosis, meaning making. So it's more than language, okay?
There is one of you, or actually two of you, Phoebe and who else? Somebody else too. Yes, Jinghua. You raised this question. Well, what about other types of semiosis? What about multimodality and so on? Yes, of course. But yeah, I mean, I'm a sort of poor old linguist. My perspective in terms of the CDFs is really on language.
Yeah, sure.
And
it's
of
very
course,
important. I mean, language is very important.
In how far the CDF construct could be made to map onto other types of semiosis, I quite simply haven't got a clue.
But I think it's got great potential for that. I mean,
maybe somebody of you
So
comes up with some ideas there.
Yes, just jump into that comment. When I was looking at your slides, you are also pointing your cursor and then putting a line, and that way we were following what you're talking about. And then I was thinking that this is a one type of semiotic meaning making where you are your behavior is pointing to explaining this situation. So it wasn't just language per se, but it was body and then the cursor and then on your language that were all enhancing the explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is totally, I mean, that would be so important also for teacher education, I think, to just create awareness. I mean, we do lots of these things all the time, totally unawares, but I'm sure much could be enhanced by some simple insights to make things clearer to the learners.
Yeah, good time to move from the continent of North America to Asia continent. So Phoebe, our co-host in Hong Kong. Phoebe, are you there, Phoebe?
Yeah, thank you very much. For a nice elaboration, especially when we brainstorm further about how to support students with different linguistics performance. My follow-up question will be, because we talk a lot about how to extend CDFs from monologic dimension to dialogic dimension. So I'm thinking about, because nowadays parental education and also private arrangement for tutoring lessons, kids are quite popular in Asia, especially in Taiwan or Hong Kong, then the verbalization experience may not be just done in formal classroom contact hours. What would you think about how we can educate their private tutors or the parents as well when they do some verbalization scaffolding for their kids, when they're guiding their kids to finish their exercise, their assignment, their assessment question or mock papers? How do we educate parents and also some private educators to do a better job with your CDFs construct? That's my curiosity about this.
Now, this is really a big social equity question in actual fact, because if we move into a lot of homeschooling, the leveling potential of school is taken away, or part of it is taken away again. Oh, I've not thought about educating parents who are doing homeschooling, because I mean they would not be coming to the table with any specific subject education of worlds of thoughts in which they are immersed. Possibly, I mean, maybe one would have to look at everyday language use and look for instances of such figures of thought and start from there. I haven't got an example now. I mean, categorizing is of course something that we do on an everyday basis all the time as well. Also exploring, actually all of this, but maybe that would be a starting point where one starts off with these figures of thought contextualized in the field of everyday life, and then sort of moves on to exemplars from education, the field of education. but that's very abstract.
I think you quoted Jay Lemke. Yeah, I think he's on the same page as you in terms of the everyday discourse functions and the science discourse functions, and then there is this teachers need to be helping students to shift comfortably between these two. It's a spectrum. I mean, it's not clear cut. It's always hybrid. But the features of everyday verbalizing and the features of scientific verbalizing of a definition, right? So
yeah, I mean,
I think it's not
we all.
Yeah.
I think we all share the experience that we have observed teachers again and again being very good at moving from the academic to the everyday and breaking things down for the kids, but then not doing the reverse.
Yeah, the broken escalator in Jim Martin and David Wilson's metaphor. The scene is good. Broken escalator.
The broken escalator.
That is and not going
up.
Yeah, yeah. So it's actually quite concrete that we experience it every day. And so Phoebe, you have other questions from your peers?
Let me check another question from. Actually, another question that my peers may be interested in exploring will be how you initiate further collaboration. Because you mentioned in your presentation slides that collaboration will be a future trend. And also you mentioned a lot of times in your publication about interdisciplinary space. And would you mind elaborating further and stimulate my peers to design more, teacher researcher collaboration project for CLIL, and also the way that you use semiotic awareness or CDFs awareness to educate the teacher as well.
We are in Austria, Germany, and a couple more Central European countries. We are in the, for this purpose, lucky position that teachers get qualified in 2 subjects. So we do have people, quite a number of people who combine a language subject with content subject. Less so for science, unfortunately, but for the social sciences, it's a very common combination. So you have teachers who may not, of course, are not researchers now, but they did have training and they have they're familiar with 2 subject worlds. So it is easier to get into a conversation with them because of that. But from our experience, it's not that we have done an endless number of such projects. From our experience, it is if you can start the conversation in such a way that you pick them up where they are in terms of what their interests are, what their goals are for their classroom, then we have found them very open, because your average teacher wants their learners to learn. And if they think you are offering them an avenue to make something better, they are initially definitely open to that. Yeah. But it's actually the conversations with the teachers are less problematic than the conversations with subject educators. So colleagues at university from the other departments, from the sports education department, history education department, and so on, because we are also invested in our theories and conceptualizations and of our disciplinary convictions. It is, in my experience, a lot more effortful to get a conversation going there and to move on to something common. I can see Bongi nodding emphatically. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a very, very similar experience.
No, I mean, that's not about CDFs at all, but nearly 10 years back, we had a 3-year project involving 14 different subject education departments. And this was, although everybody was Austrian or German, so this was my most intense intercultural experience I've ever had in terms of disciplinary cultures struggling to get into a common conversation and to achieve understanding.
I noticed that Bongi has a question about how do you situate CDF in the theories of genre and registers, the Cine school? Yeah.
Yeah. There is, I mean, obviously, there is what is it? Relation being is very related in terms of sort of basic thinking, in terms of functional thinking. The CDFs are in no way as theoretically sophisticated and elaborated or integrated in a fully coherent theory of language as the Sydney School ideas of genre or register typologies are. There are of course some parallels. I think it was Bongi you mentioned, Mathieson. I've been looking more at sort of Rose's typologies and so on. And the Sydney people have done amazing things in terms of really bringing those things into the schools. But on the theoretical level, the sophistication is such that the CDF construct was an attempt to sort of to bypass this sophistication.
Sophisticated sometimes.
In terms of making it usable for getting into a conversation with people who are not linguists. But I think when I retire, maybe I would like to sit down and think more about how these can be integrated, or where the place of the CDFs could be in relation to SFL theorizing about educational registers and genres. What I also found with SFL stuff is that it is very much directed towards writing, producing written texts. And as I indicated earlier, in the teaching traditions here, producing writing in content subjects is there is just very, very little of it. So I wanted something that I could work with also with oral in classroom interaction.
I think in my 2016 book on CLIL, I tried to use the genre A.
Exactly. Yeah.
Try to integrate everything together. Yeah. Integrate your CDF into the genre A and the register. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's on a sort of a lower level of integration. Let's say it's on a more basic. So these are more sort of little bricks. Yeah.
So I also see the semantic patterns of JLMT also kind of a similar status with your CDF, maybe even at a lower level than CDF.
Even
less general because they are more discipline specific semantic patterns. So for those doctoral students, there's still a lot of work for you to do, both in terms of theory and also in terms of pedagogical implications, theoretical and pedagogical exploration.
Yeah, and in terms of multimodality as well.
I do have a question about how CDF can be made more discipline specific. I think someone has asked this. Like a historian's definition might be similar to a scientist's definition, but there are also discipline specific details. So that kind of research questions could be interesting because it's just like generic CDF, and then you have like the delicacy. I mean the
yeah. Totally. Whereby I think at the school education level, probably the disciplinary differences are less pronounced than at tertiary level. But as Natalia and I also found when we were looking at Categorize, obviously there are differences also between school science and school history, and quite pronounced ones. Yeah. So yes, there's tons of research work
tons of PhD thesis.
Tons of PhD thesis as well. Yeah.
So back to Qinghua, you have any questions that you want to ask? Back to North America.
Been discussed, and I have a new question actually. I think just now Dr. Lin and Dr. Dalton-Puffer also mentioned about the pedagogical implication. So what I'm thinking now is that I personally see there's a lot of potential to like make, I don't know how to describe, to develop a dictionary out of the cognitive discourse functions. Why I call it, I would like to say maybe it's a disciplinary specific dictionaries that can help students to write in that discipline. For example, if they want to they want to achieve cognitive function, we provide examples in it. And then we also see how the sentences are written. So I think this can actually have huge pedagogical implication, and it can also be useful for both students and teachers who I mean there's a great chance. I think there's a great potential in this regard, because if I thought if I had this, it might be like a very good tool. So but it has to be developed together in cooperation with the subject teachers, right? So yeah.
Right. I mean, there's in teaching materials, in especially second language content teaching, of course, in many places, teachers have developed sentence frames and building blocks and stuff. But this dictionary idea that you formulated now, I think that's really great, because it could be a way to pull things together, pull 100 worksheets together and systematize them, and thereby make them more accessible.
Yeah, it's building corpuses. Because the dictionary idea or the corpuses idea, because you could have classroom verbalizations, and then you can have textbook realizations. So you can have different ways of realizing a CDF. Like what you showed to us, like in the classroom, the co-constructing of the informal verbalized definition in the classroom, but then in a textbook you can have this formal written, and then in a popular science magazine. So we can actually do corpus analysis, build up different corpuses in different formality levels, different contexts. Yeah.
Another load of work to do.
Another PhD thesis. Another
4 PhD theses.
Yeah, that's 4. Another dozen of PhD theses. So often I heard doctoral students say, "Oh, what should I do? What should I do?" Right? So they should come to our seminar, and they get insights about. There's so much work waiting to be done.
I have like a comment on this too. I think that I'm not sure. I mean, as a PhD student, I'm like also curious. Like you said, there's a lot of work to do, like in terms to systematize this information and bring it maybe to develop out a dictionary. But in terms of like academic values, do they usually see this type of work as maybe less academically valuable than maybe like a publication of theory, or have the other type of more theoretical work? So yeah, sometimes it can be. I think there's some contingencies in here. Do you agree that I think there are less people who are probably doing the maybe developing the dictionary work that we talked about just now?
Yes, I mean, we have to face up to the realities of academic life and how the number of brownie points you earn for doing A or B. And I agree with you that evaluators often evaluate theoretical publications higher than in pedagogy development work. But in Europe, at least, there is, I see the beginnings, or a bit more than the beginnings of design-based research playing a role and actually being really recognized as serious research.
And materials design also.
Yeah.
So I don't want to call it a dictionary though. If you call it corpus, then you can publish it in a lot of journals.
Yeah.
It depends on how you situate your work within the theoretical traditions of the disciplines. The dictionary sounds like you are publishing a dictionary. If you are doing corpus analysis, But situating your work within the theoretical traditions is also important.
Yeah, I mean that's the role for the thesis advisors or your mentor if you already if you have already finished your PhD, to people who have more experience with these disciplinary traditions and strategic thinking about. Yeah, it's a lot of academia is also about packaging your ideas and your work in such ways that the peers will accept them.
That's basically the idea of genre and register. It's about how you package your information, your ideas for different contexts, different audiences.
Yeah.
So back to any other questions from the floor? I haven't seen any questions from the live chat. So those who are viewing us, the 12 people viewing us, please feel free to type in your questions or comments or feedback on your YouTube. So you can. I'm looking at comments as well. Phoebe, you have any other questions from your peers in Asia?
Yeah. May I follow up Qinghua's brainstorming idea about the corpus or the multimodal dictionary? Because actually I discussed with a guest speaker from a talk, and he's Dr. Anthony Lawrence, and is an expert in corpus linguistics or some research about corpus. And then we talk about how teachers, very often we need some real-time resources. And then like Professor Lin has already introduced the idea that we may make it more, multimodal way to encode and also to ethnographically research the elements, the semiotic elements embedded in classroom interaction, or even when they are reading multimodal application nowadays, because so many educational application online, and then the student may just download it from their mobile phones. So if we turn Qinghua's idea about dictionary or Professor Lin's extension about the corpus genres into some educational application that teachers across disciplines, for example, like you mentioned, you collaborate with science teacher, history teachers, biology teachers, then actually we do like interdisciplinary project like this, and then each of us try to contribute our data through our classroom interaction with students or our selection of teaching materials, or even our daily life experience into something more useful as pedagogical resources. Would you think that this kind of project will be too big or too complicated, or you see still some potential to turn it into reality or something?
It seems very. I mean, it's a great idea. It seems very big. I would say I have no experience in actually creating such applications, but I would say realistically start small in the sense of trying to cover one subject or one group of related subjects. No, one subject, one subject for one educational level. I'm not talking just one grade level, but maybe an age bracket of 2 or 3 years.
Yes, I think, Phoebe, you can actually start small. I think building it into an assignment. That is, the students, bottom up, get the students to find examples of the different functions. This can raise their awareness of the different verbalizations of the functions. And then it's also this very popular now in Japan and in called maker-centered learning. So instead of we design everything for students, if we help students to catch fish, we do not give them fish, but help them to become fishermen and fisherwomen. That is, they discover from their everyday examples and their textbook examples and their classroom interaction examples of all these different realizations of the different CDFs. And then they come up with their dictionary or corpuses. So maker-centered learning, this approach.
Okay, yeah. That's a new term for me.
It's very popular in Japan, and I think it's not in Japan. I think Professor Ikeda, are you in the audience? I think he would have heard of it. It's very popular in Japan. And then also all over the world now, maker-centered learning approach. Yeah.
I think we use it more in tertiary education. I think we do use it, but I'm not familiar with it on secondary or primary level.
Actually, it's I think they started from the coding, getting the K-12 students to learn how to do programming and coding, and then make apps. They make apps.
Yeah, like they make apps. Exactly. Yeah.
Any other questions from our co-hosts? I mean, you can just jump in and raise questions. And oh yeah, I have a question from the audience of YouTube, from Pecha Emily in Hong Kong. One of the strategies for learning content subjects is to map out the interrelationship between different concepts involved in a specific topic. And then as language teachers, how can we provide the language scaffolding in the process of visualizing the relationship between concepts? Can CDFs function in this process? So that's Emily in Hong Kong.
So if I understood that right, Emily, you're thinking of visual maps, of concept maps. Well, if I imagine that as a situation where in the classroom where we can see such a concept map, that would be, and then you verbalize it, that would be describe. That would be describing something that the teacher sees, that the learners present in the classroom or online see, and the classic really of formal education, we talk about what we see. We don't take it as understood that everybody sees the same, that everybody understands what they see the same, but therefore we verbalize it in the attempt to establish this intersubjectivity. So, I mean, that concrete situation would be describing.
Yeah, or classifying. You could have like a biologist, like tree diagrams. I mean, all these multimodal semiotic resources in performing the functions, the CDFs. I mean, I could see you can theorize along those different resources to describe. So how do you describe a cell? You can verbalize it. You can write a description of it in a biology text. You can draw a line diagram, or you can have a microscopic picture. So there are very different ways of representing this description of the structure of a cell, for example, in biology science. So that's multimodal realizations of CDFs. Yeah. I would look at it from this angle. Yeah.
So I think that's we beginning to think about this in terms of an interaction between the modalities, of course, because then you always need the language, you need the verbalization to make it make accessible the understanding that I have to somebody else.
I think a former colleague of mine in Hong Kong, Dr. Maurice Chen, now in New Zealand, he has done a lot of work on how just listening to the verbalization, the explanations of students of the biology concept cannot expose some missing gaps in their conceptual knowledge until we see them draw the description of the biological structures of the, say, for example, the circulation system. So the interaction of the modalities, precisely what you said just now. And it all has important pedagogical, educational implications, because if your assessment just asks students to draw a diagram, of course it's not, but just to give a verbal description,
also not enough.
Also, some missing gaps of knowledge is also not shown there. Yeah. So we need multimodalities, interactions.
Yeah.
From the floor, open to you, co-host.
Bungie,
yes.
Have one more question. I don't know whether it's beyond the scope of the research, but I was kind of more curious about the affective dimensions in learning and how this emotional aspects of learning can be complementary to or relevant to CDF model.
Yeah, but I would say complementary. I'm totally convinced that the foundations of everything we do is actually our affect, and the cognitions of sits on top of it. But the CDF construct itself does not integrate affect or emotion. No. And I wouldn't know how to do it, and I don't know whether that would be useful. But I would agree with you totally in saying that our emotional being is the foundation of learning. Yeah.
I guess the SFL people would be able to say something like, here is my classification, here is my explanation, but as I'm verbalizing my explanation or description to you, I'm also showing my stance or my orientation. And my orientation, that is my judgment, my evaluation of the description that I'm giving you, and also my orientation to you, my relationship to you. So I think that's how the SFL people handle it. That is simultaneously we are verbalizing, we're performing the CDFs, which they will classify as the ideational meta function, and then they have the interpersonal meta function, then maybe the emotional stances, evaluative interpersonal stances would be in the interpersonal function. Yeah. So in the verbalization, like the example you gave, the co-construction of the definition, there's also this implicit realization of this emotional, I mean, not emotional, but this affective, this collaboration this togetherness that we are co-producing this definition in the history, in the history class. Yeah. So we have a question from Arlene. So Arlene is not here, but she has written the questions in Dalton-Puffer and Bauer, Schalinger, 19. You provide examples of using the CDF model in history class. Do you think this framework is applicable in elementary school classrooms?
Yeah, absolutely. The study in Madrid included elementary school. Well, it's primary education. It's grades 5 and 6, but that is still primary education. And the basic communicative intentions are very simple. So you would with second graders, you would give them a more simple expression. I don't believe, so there is no hierarchy in these 7 functions, but each of them can be done in a more simple or more sophisticated way as you kind of spiral through your cognitive development.
And also the use of the interactions of the different modalities, right, with elementary school students, also lots of visuals or physical manipulation of objects, to do the descriptions, the classification. Any more questions from the floor and from our co-host?
Yeah. May I follow up a question about elementary school, since Ali has introduced this area? Actually, because when I was a kid, I love what we call singing class in the kindergarten, because actually it's through the music, through the body dance or movements, and also through the verbalization memory that I remember words and the lyrics, and then maybe I learn a new language, like when I'm singing English song as my second language in kindergarten, just like London Bridge is falling down. Then actually I haven't seen London Bridge. Then maybe the teacher will try to give pictures and multimodal resources. So all these are wonderful memories, and also addressing Bongi's question about how motivation or affective aspect actually help us to follow up the discourse, cognitive discourse function live streaming. Because at that moment, I'm a kid, but why I can sustain the attention span on my teacher or the classroom is because I'm happy. So would these elements deliver us to a new path of educating their, emergent bilingual or plurilinguals, and also educate their teachers to create more resources like this? And how can they be well equipped with the awareness about producing happiness, but actually at the same time producing cognitive discourse function index or happy emojis for the kids? Would you see that as a potential as well?
Well, it's difficult to disagree with the idea that people who are in a good emotional state are more open to learn. So, but I cannot see a specific connection to the cognitive discourse functions per se. I would say the task of a teacher, of a pedagogue, to take care of the emotional well-being of one's own, and also, of course, of the learners, is really sort of a foundation on which everything else can build. But of course, real-world education systems don't tend to pay a lot of attention to that. They tend to be dominated by this goal-directedness of high-stakes exams and so on and so forth, where, let's say, the cognitive discourse functions rule, totally, and the the emotive discourse functions
Yes, that's a good term.
are sort of
Emotive
below totally below the radar.
Mm.
Totally below the
That's
radar.
a good term, the emotive discourse function.
Well, what that would be, I have no idea. But anyway.
Any other questions from the floor? Okay.
I have one more question. I was one of your slides. You mentioned about the disparities between the lack of discourse functions existing in EFL classroom, whereas other content classrooms have a lot of discourse functions. Is it because EFL context generally saturated within developing general academic literacies versus these other content areas are more geared towards disciplinary specific literacies, or is it just I'm kind of curious to hear more.
Yeah, no, actually, to tell you the truth, I was surprised that this particular MA student found as many cognitive discourse functions in the EFL lessons. I mean, they were, what was it, grade 8, I think, so not that advanced actually. Yeah, because certainly at that stage, it's general English, and the goal of English EFL teaching in Austria at that stage is to make you functional on an everyday level, and not much at all on an academic level. That starts to happen in upper secondary, but until the end of lower secondary, so grade 8 or 9, it's really general life. But it goes to show that also so general everyday life, we do use our cognition, well, clearly.
In general lives, we do still have functions in that chasm of general lives as well.
Of course, it is not all these 7 cognitive types of cognitive discourse functions. We also want to share our emotions. We inform each other of events in our environment. We want to get other people to do things for us. I mean, so the classic speech acts like requests and things like that, or commissives of making promises for the future and that kind of stuff, that is not included in the CDF construct. But of course, that would be part of our interaction all the time, and in EFL to a larger extent than in physics, probably, because of the field, because of the type of things that we talk about typically in such lessons.
We have research emotional talk in emotional talk, approaches to language and emotion in systemic functional linguistics and beyond. I guess this is the name of the book that she's sharing with us. And then April from our audience on YouTube.
Yeah.
I have April New in Hong Kong. I have a question about the different levels of CDFs. Would cognitively more sophisticated classroom interactions tend to embed more meta-level or episode-level CDFs than less sophisticated ones? So one of your slides, you show the coding.
No, I don't think it's about sophistication. I think this is just a natural way in which any kind of classroom interaction is structured. You would find that also this nesting, you would find that at any educational level, I would say.
Yes, you actually cited the page number, page 118 of J. Lemke's meta discourse.
Yeah, I mean, J. Lemke also makes a very strong point of the importance of the meta discourse, of making, well, the visible pedagogy, making things visible, That's what educational linguists have been concerned ever since they have invented themselves. Because of the classic good student, being good at school essentially always has meant that you happen to have this talent to pick up what is expected of you in terms of mostly linguistic behavior.
Yeah, to go beyond and then to reflect on it using a meta discourse.
And so the meta discourse would be that would be a visible pedagogy, making it visible to those people who need the visibility to be able to produce.
Yeah, and especially in second language, foreign language, additional.
And especially there, but also, let's face it, in first language education.
Exactly, because the languages of the disciplines are foreign languages in their own right. Yeah. So, any other questions? I'm aware of the time. Please, the last round. So perhaps we have a last round of takeaways. I always ask before we end our session, the takeaway from this live seminar. Let's start from Chenghua, and then Petro, and then Bungi, and then Phoebe.
Yes, I think today my takeaway is to be able to get more understanding of the cognitive discourse function through the presentation of Dr. Dalton-Puffer, because it also clarifies some of the ideas from the reading. And I really enjoyed this process, and I've got a chance to ask the questions that I'm interested in, have my spontaneous idea discussed with the members here too. So I feel very happy about it. Okay, thank you.
Yes, and then Petro. Yeah.
I think that my takeaway would be in looking into the relationship of the CDFs with students and identities, because I was really impressed by the piece of data that you mentioned in relation to the students being resistant in terms of, oh, I'm studying the discipline, I'm not studying language, because literature has shown that this is really common, coming from the discourses of discipline teachers instead of language teachers. But I didn't expect that in terms of the students producing that. So I think that my takeaway would be like looking at the CDFs and the relationship between a student and teacher in a classroom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bungi?
I actually, I hope that I'm making some sense, but one of the things that I noticed is how CDF model is not just a model, but it ties with different kinds of theories. For example, how this CDF model is allow us to understand how meaning making functions, and then how these meaning making functions allow raising the awareness of language, and then how this connects to importance of meta language, which again connects to critical pedagogy. So I was able to see the chain of thoughts that this model has, how it's been connected to other theories and discussions, and then potentially towards critical aspects of language learning as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bungi.
Thanks, and Phoebe.
Okay, thank you very much for the time today. Actually, when I go through the publications and in the interaction today, I feel very happy that I, as a teacher, because we always would like to equip ourselves to understand more about what students need. And I agree with today's discussion of the educational goals that we need to co-create and co-sustain in the learning community. And also, I feel very grateful about bringing the idea of semiotic awareness or cognitive discourse function awareness, because when we try to push the students to face the assessment or assignment deadline or the stress, maybe they will feel very negative and have negative emotion. But today, when we address all the domains and dimension, I feel that we should stay positive and also try to adopt Professor Lin's idea about maker-centered learning to co-create some new perspective and stance that can use CDFs as a very important and also co-creating thinking tools for sustaining both cognitive development and also linguistic or multimodal development for young learners or also adult learners. That's my takeaway today. And thank you so much for the valuable brainstorming together and the live streaming. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christiane. And I know it's early morning for you.
Not so early anymore. I would really like to thank you very much indeed, all of you, for this great discussion and for your involvement and engagement. Thank you.
Yeah, and before we go away, here's our poster for the next seminar, November 27th. We have Dr. Michael Roth in University of Victoria, Canada, and then Paul Thibault from Norway. And they're going to talk about something about process, ontology, and transactional analysis. And then the next seminar that we have lined up is in February next year with Mariana Turner from University of from Melbourne in Australia, from Monash University, and she will be translanguaging as the majority theory. So we do have a very rich program and full of star speakers. Yeah. So thanks so much, Christiane, and
thanks
everybody
for inviting me. And have a good day and a good night, everybody.
And a good morning.
And morning.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.